My name is Tim Ubergang. I'm Curator of Horticulture at the University of Melbourne System Garden. In honour of Botanic Gardens Day, we are visiting Botanic Gardens across Victoria to, among other things, understand a little bit more about education, horticulture, conservation and community engagement. I hope this is an opportunity for people to learn a little bit more about Botanic Gardens that they didn't already know, and encourage them to go out into Botanic Gardens and appreciate all the value that they can provide.
Botanic Garden for me is obviously a great collection of plants, but beyond the individual plants and their scientific value is the notion of Botanic Gardens as very special social places as well. We have a number of groups who come to our gardens, or are very welcomed to our gardens, from high school students. We've got a beautiful local high school who come to our gardens to they study photography, so they're using our garden as a venue to come and find beautiful things to photograph. Basically, we're really trying to encourage children to look and be in a garden in a particular way. And what we try to do is role model the way we'd like people to be in the garden in terms of interacting gently with the space. But really, we're trying to foster a love of plants and a connection to the garden.
The best thing about a botanic garden is that it holds all those collections of plants, that you can come here and visit the world without having to travel anywhere else. That you can come here and visit plants that you wouldn't see in your backyard, you wouldn't see in your local area. So we're in a process of expansion and building. So we've just created our Garden for the Future, which is under 12 months old. We've also got the oldest public garden in Bendigo as well. So our heritage garden is over 160 years old. So hopefully we'll be replacing some of the older trees in the gardens in the heritage section. We'll also be joining the new garden with the old, so there'll be a new transition zone between the two gardens.
I think the really great botanic gardens are botanic gardens that are hubs. They're social hubs, they're environmental hubs, they're conservation hubs, they're horticultural hubs. The role of botanic gardens in conservation, what we're doing with Big Anne's Victoria is looking at establishing conservation collections in a number of regional botanic gardens across the state of Victoria. But for that project to be sort of driven and supported by the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria. Essentially what we're doing is we're going out to regional botanic gardens, we're working with the gardens curators and gardens managers on an approach to establishing collections of rare and threatened plants that are significant to that particular area. And then the RBGV will actually collect, source and propagate all that material and then distribute that material back out into regional gardens.
So a botanic garden, for me, means that it's a place for people to firstly enjoy, but then it has all those other benefits of labelled plants, documented collections of plants. The importance of botanic gardens to communities, I believe, is that it gives them a sense of pride, it gives them a sense of place, and we've had people come on guided tours here, and one particular comment said the Melton Botanic Garden has put Melton on the map. To a large extent, this garden is the community because the people have been the ones pushing it, backing it. The feedback we get from people who are visiting, walking through, doing recreational activities here is just fantastic.
A community space.
It's a garden to display a collection or a variety of plants.
What is a botanical garden? The most beautiful place to come to.
It's a wonderful refuge for the community and for visitors.
I think the free access is the best thing.
For me personally, it's the joy that it brings to people.
Everything, I guess, we need plants for everything to live, really.
Education, conservation ideals and public enjoyment.
Knowledge and inspiration and understanding.
Well, I'd be biased and say the Eramophilas.
Banksia.
Well, in Australia, red gum trees.
A plant with gum nuts in it.
It's the eucalyptus.
Eucalyptus.
Eucalyptus gum tree.
Botanic Gardens Day is the last Sunday in May, so put it in your diary. Botanic Gardens Day is the last Sunday in May.
I'm just one of many curator managers across Australia and New Zealand who are doing the same thing. To work together to promote our gardens collectively is exactly what we want to do.
Over 10.5 million people visit Botanic Gardens throughout Australia and New Zealand every year. We're talking school students, we're talking office workers coming down for lunch, to have a picnic, to come to an event, to learn about sustainability, to learn about horticulture, to do a course in growing vegetables. There's so much research capacity, there's so many career pathways into botany and science of horticulture. It's pretty exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, when you think about medicines, most of the medicines that treat all of our ailments come from plants and fungi. Less than 1% of the world's plants have been studied for their medicinal values.
You name it, there's a million reasons why we can visit the Botanic Gardens. Bring your grandparents, bring your parents, bring your aunts and uncles, bring the kids, the grandkids, the godkids. Check out the website, begans.org.au. I'll see you there. Well, a very good afternoon to all of you joining us for this 5th Begans Day, which is Botanic Gardens Australia and New Zealand celebration. As you saw on the video, we are covering Australia and New Zealand, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here in the Wollongong Botanic Gardens as they celebrate their 50th anniversary. Can you give a big round of applause? What you can't see on the video is that I brought a few friends with me, and they're all here enjoying the beauty that is the Wollongong Botanic Gardens. It's absolutely buzzing here, and there's a wonderful crowd ready to listen to our fantastic speakers who will be joining us shortly. But to get underway, I would like to introduce Melissa Henkelman, and she's a representative of the local Dharawal people, and she's going to welcome us all here today. Over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Costa. Yalunga, Yalunga. Welcome to dignitaries, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Also a special mention to elders and Aboriginal people here today as you celebrate Botanic Garden Day here at Wollongong Botanic Garden. As Costa said, my name's Melissa Henkelman and I'm a proud member of the local Aboriginal community. Today I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we meet today, the Dharawal people. Dharawal country extends from Sydney to Wollongong and down to the Shoalhaven River, and it's over one of 500 different nations around the country, each offering their own language, spiritual beliefs and culture. As you can appreciate, Aboriginal people have a deep connection to the land, the waterways, the plants and the animals that live in it. And it features in all facets of Aboriginal culture, from Dreamtime stories down to cultural learning. I also pay respect to our ancestors and our elders past, present and emerging. They're our true heroes, and they've taught us to stand up and be proud of our culture, the oldest surviving culture in the world, dating back 50,000 years or maybe longer. So in closing, and on behalf of the local Aboriginal community, I welcome you here today and wish you a successful and fun event here in Wollongong on Dharawal country. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
For joining us and welcoming us all here today.
Thank you.
As you're all aware, it is National Reconciliation this week, National Reconciliation Week this week, and I've been fortunate enough to spend some time over the last 3 days up in the central west of Parkes and Forbes, and had a wonderful evening with a wonderful welcome dance ceremony that took place as part of the National Landcare project that's going on out there. And today, Botanic Gardens and plants, the power of plants. That's what our panel discussion is about. And plants is country. Plants are country. Plants make this planet of ours inhabitable for us. And what I'm really excited about for this panel discussion today is that we've got such a mix of people, but I think they will inspire each and every one of you watching online, each and every one of you here today in the gardens, to shine a light on the connections that we have with plants in everything we do. And I really look forward to seeing how our speakers just put that light bulb on and make you see this wonderful world around us through the goggles, yes, through the plant goggles. I better not go too far off screen there. But it's all about the plant goggles today and where they fit in and how that drives the wonderful ecosystems and landscapes that we live and travel through and exist on every single day. So that's it. We're here at Wollongong Botanic Gardens. It's a pleasure to be here, and sitting next to me is the curator of the living collections, James Beattie. James, how do you feel? There's so many people here.
It's very exciting and really great to see everyone turning out today. So thank you everyone for coming. It's a great day to talk about the passion of plants and the passion that's very close to my heart and yours. So yes, very exciting day. Yeah. And celebrating our 50 years as well. This year, it's a special moment in our history, from the beginning of the Botanic Gardens to now.
Well, it's wonderful that we can actually be here, because 5 years ago, I came here for the first Begans Day. And I remember after the conference, the idea came, and it was like, we're going to do this Begans Day, are you up for it? And I said, yes, let's build and grow it. And to have reached 5 years now and to be back here for your 50th birthday, I couldn't think of a better place to begin our panel discussion for this 5th anniversary of Begans Day. So to get going, rather than me read a whole lot about our panellists and waste time, because you'll be able to read about that anytime. We've got live panellists here that are going to respond to questions. And the first question that I want to ask each of the panellists, and they're going to give us a 1-minute explanation of, can you introduce yourself and let us know a time when you thought plants are remarkable. Now on my screen here I have our panellists, and I'm going to start on the left with Peter Buchanan. And Peter Buchanan is locking in the fact that this is Begans, Botanic Gardens Australia and New Zealand. Peter, you're over in Auckland. Can you give us an idea of when plants were remarkable for you?
Great. Well, thanks, Costa, and it's a real privilege to be part of Buchanan's, my first experience of that, and great to have Kiwis mixing with Australians. So it's a joint trans-Tasman event. Yes, I'm a fungal scientist. I'm a so-called mycologist. I study fungi, but before I learnt to marvel, or should I say, before I was captivated about fungi, I actually was captivated about plants. And that happened at university, as late as university, because I went to university and I was determined to study animals. That was all my life. I absolutely was going to study animals. Well, the lecturer, Larry Jensen, who took me on the study of plants, opened my eyes to plants. I suddenly found plants were absolutely amazing. And that switched me toward the step that's zoology, the study of fungi, but that's another story. I switched on to plants because of a wonderful lecturer at university.
That's the powerful thing about mentors and that reality that we can meet someone at any point in our day, week or year who could be that inspiration. So thanks for sharing that with us. So from over in Auckland, we're going to drop down to Victoria and catch up with Ricardo Sameo. Ricardo, tell us a little bit about yourself and when you had one of those plant light bulb moments.
G'day, Costa. Yes, well, look, I work down at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Victoria. I'm one of the managers there, and I look after the remnant conservation zone, the bushland, at the Cranbourne Gardens site. So I've got a very devoted team that looks after all the plants, all the animals, all the fungi at that site. Look, I had migrated to Australia when I was in my early teens, and I didn't. Similar to Peter, my life's mission was to look after animals. I was going to become a vet. I ended up sort of more on the park ranger kind of role, looking after not just the animals but the plants. And I guess that sort of light bulb moment came to me at one stage. Similar at uni as well, where I was looking at all these animals that I was so passionate about, and the realization came that animals need plants to survive. They live inside plants, inside tree hollows, and they feed on plants. So that got me looking a little bit closer, a little bit deeper into all the life strategies that plants employ. And I got to tell you, my little mind was blown when I first discovered that there were plants that were carnivorous. That just stopped it off for me.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for setting up your take on that question. And from down in Victoria, we're going to head up to Sydney now, because next to you on the screen is Georgina. Georgina Reid, the plant hunter. Tell us a little bit of your background and your light bulb moment.
Thanks, Costa. And hi, everyone. I'm coming in. I'm on Darug country today, and I want to acknowledge that I'm standing here, and I want to acknowledge that the elders, past, present, and emerging, who are custodians of this land and this water outside my window this morning. So here I am. I am the editor of The Plant Hunter, which is an online magazine exploring the connections between people and plants and nature. And I'm also the editor of a print journal which I launched earlier this year called Wonderground, which takes those ideas a little bit further. So my life I've been immersed in plants always, and I've been trying to think of a particular light bulb moment, Costa, and I can't. I mean, there's in so many ways, and this might sound a little bit trite, but every single day I'm kind of astounded by the plants that I get to live with and that I'm surrounded by, the trees, the she oaks out my window, the gums up the hill. There's so much to be amazed by if you're looking around and if you're open to plants. So it's my practice to always be open to plants and always to be looking and seeing. And so it's a life of revelation, I guess, and wonderment. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you for having me.
I like that, James. It's not a single light bulb for Georgina. It's like coming around the corner, driving down the highway, and suddenly there's the fluoro-filled 7-Eleven, and there's just light everywhere, everywhere you look. I like that idea that it's bright and light wherever you go. So thanks, Georgina. And now we're moving from Sydney a little further north to catch up with Suzanne Thompson. Suzanne, it's lovely to see you. Lovely to have you as part of the panel. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your light bulb, fluorescent or spotlight moment around plants.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, Costa. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge, Melissa, thank you very much for the acknowledgement and welcome to country. For me, Mikini Budal, it's a good day today. Namala, I'm big sister, and on the Inangai lands in central Western Queensland. So I'm the current chair of Australian Native Foods and Botanicals. So for me, my passion is about our, I suppose, our supermarket, which we live in, our whole city. When I, as an Indigenous woman, look out, I think what inspires me is the whole environment that we are all walking within. And I think that's something that's passed down with our elders over the many millennia. But my light bulb moment probably was taking me back to when we would be taken out when we were little by our elders to teach us how to track. And I remembered that I had a cut and there was blood, but I remembered observing that there was a timber that was burnt, and the ash that was placed on that, which actually stopped the bleeding. So that light bulb moment for me was the amazement of this plant was better than a Band-Aid, that it actually helped fix me. So I think also to know that it nourishes me. So power of the plant, oh my gosh. If we think that all of the things that they provide for us, and I look sometimes at, bloodwood trees, and I think about them being, the big supermarket tree and how much they can provide for us, not only just shelter, but water, food. They can also keep us warm, so and they can also give us a nice drink, and probably something sweet. So when I think of them, and then their healing properties as well. So if I have a cancer or something like that, then I know that I can go to just one tree alone. And I think that's one of the things that excites me about our Australian native botanicals.
Yeah.
Is that, have so many of them here in Australia that can provide, the medicinal as well as the healthy components for us. So thanks, Costa, and hi, everybody.
Thanks, Suzanne. Well, James, I'll just throw it to you. We know that your role is here at the Gardens as the living curator of living collections. How have plants given you that moment in your life?
I think I've grown up with very passionate grandparents, and there was a friend of my grandparents, a lady called Pam, who I used to run across and see whenever I used to go and see my grandparents, and she would always get me out in her garden and she'd show me terrestrial orchids that she grew in the garden. And I think just talking to her, witnessing plants through her eyes was where it all started, and that passion just grew and grew. And the more you know about plants, the more you understand their interactions, how they welcome in and converse with the fungi world, the bacterial world, all the animals and the wildlife. It is just endless, and like Georgina said, it is that just constant light bulb moment of you just look around and you look around us sitting here today, green, and we're all breathing. We're all breathing. Thanks, plants. So yeah, that's probably my light bulb moments through time.
Yeah, thank you. So now, Georgina, I want to throw this next question to you. Vocations in the world of plants. are so broad, from the simplest of occupations like lawn mowing to botanical art or molecular biology. People are taking it into space. You've spoken to so many people in the field. Is there a particular story or person that resonates with you in a way that gives you optimism for the future, and that's something we all can learn from?
Thank you, Costa. My God, as you said, I've spoken to so many people, and I see that as a real honour to be able to hold and share and retell so many incredible stories about people and plants. And it's a very hard thing to pick, I guess. But I will share a couple of stories with you. And I guess the first one actually is a story we published on The Plant Hunter just last week about a woman, Hannah Cherton, she just moved back to Australia just at the beginning of COVID. New city, new home, didn't know anyone, and a mad composter like you.
Oh, yes.
And
I'm liking the sound of this.
So she was like, you know, what do? I need to find community. I need to get my hands in the soil. And so she started up this community composting hub in her carport out the front, a no-contact composting hub, put the buckets out, scavenged some old bathtubs from Facebook Marketplace, whatever, set it up, put up a sign and thought, oh, you know, maybe one or two people will come. Ended up, the whole street got involved. They ended up diverting, I think she said, over 2 tons of food waste from landfill, turning it into compost and then giving it back out, using it on the street, growing a verge garden. And she writes in this story that, you know, it turns out it wasn't actually the buckets of food that were fueling this compost hub, it was the community that was fueling it. And, you know, just stories like that always just make me, you know, there's so much there to be inspired by. Another great story, I guess, is a project in LA called Wild Yards Project. This guy was like, you know, we need, obviously, biodiversity in gardens is a really important thing to be thinking and talking about. And he started up this project called Wild Yards, which is really about encouraging and connecting local gardeners to grow mostly endemic species and create habitat gardens. And the idea of it is to eventually create an app and a map that connects all of these gardens from you know, public green spaces through suburbs, creating wildlife corridors for all species within urban areas. And, you know, he said something to me which I think is really profound. And, you know, often we get, you know, it's hard to kind of feel like you can't do very much. And, you know, there's so much to be doing and should be doing. And, you know, how to be good citizens in the world. And, you know, he said it's not, you know, it's not small, the way we think about them. And you think about all of these little small acts together can create something really, really powerful and really important. And so there's so many people, I guess. And one other story I do want to tell, because it's been one of the most profound stories that I've had the pleasure of being involved with and being a part of, was a garden I went to visit in North Turramurra in Sydney, and it was owned by a woman called Sue Miles, who was a camellia fanatic, and so she'd spent a life collecting camellias. And I went there, and, you know, someone told me about this garden, and I said, I have to go and have a look at it. I went there with Dr. Daniel Ship, who I work with a lot, and we went there and met with Sue and her son Peter, who had started taking over the garden when Sue was about 80, because he went up there one day and Sue had a bit of a sore back, and he said, Mum, what have you been doing? And she said, oh, well, I just spent the day digging out privet roots and I'm a little bit stiff and sore. And he's like, right, I'm confiscating the tools, going in the shed, I'm taking over this garden, you know, sit back, relax a bit. And so this garden, again, as I said, you know, this very traditional camellia garden sort of morphed. He was a bromeliad fanatic, still is. And so it morphed into this wild kind of camellia, bromeliad, tillandsia, ripsalis kind of madness, like this big cherry tree dripping with bromeliads and tillandsias. And we sat on the veranda with Sue, and she had her little notebook of all of the important things that she'd noted about the garden over the years. And we ended up having the most incredible conversation about legacy, really. And it sort of took all of us by surprise. I guess I'm always interested in the stories that are about relationship. You know, plant specifics are interesting to me, but they're not the juice, I guess. And we just got to this really profound story of connection and love between mother and son, and the way the garden had brought them together and facilitated that love. And I ended up weeping. Daniel had to go and hide behind a hydrangea and cry. We all kind of, it just was such a special moment for all of us, and it felt like such a profound honor to be able to share that and to hold that story. And coming back to the power of plants, I know maybe that's a very big ramble, and there's there that are all kind of quite different, but that story in particular, I guess, really comes back to the power of plants and of gardens to connect us. And I think now is a time that we need stories to connect us to each other and to the world around us. And you know, there's stories of the mind, of course, and there's stories of science, and there's stories of necessity and practicality, but the stories of the heart are really deeply affecting, I think, and really important to be sharing and to be telling. And that's the work that interests me, and that's what I do. So thank you, Costa.
Yeah, well, I think you've put that perfectly into context, that idea of connection and threads, because this takes me over to Peter now, because your work is all about the fungi and the fungi and the hyphae and the mycorrhizal connections that are going on under the ground. The wood wide web was coined by Suzanne Thompson. And that's all about the role that fungi and fungi diversity plays in our natural ecosystems, whether it's a rainforest, a dry mallee, or even in the home garden of the people doing the Wild Yards project, or the lady that you talked about doing the compost hub. So Peter, in light of that and what Georgina's just said, and out of your work, is there something we can take out of this for cultivated gardens, that role that fungi and the more we learn about it can play?
Sure, thanks, Costa. Yes, indeed. I mean, the different functions and roles that fungi play in ecosystems was the thing that actually captured me at university, because I realized that lots and lots of things that are going on in the ecosystem are happening because fungi are living and doing what comes naturally to them. So, and as a result of that, captured by fungi, I was fortunate enough to get a dream job. So I'm incredibly lucky. I'm a fungal scientist, Botanic Gardens land care research, both dried and living specimens, also, or living material and culture. So I've got all these fungi around me, and I've got some other strange people with me that so study fungi. So we're a cohesive group of fungal fanatics. But it's what fungi do, and we can take it for granted so much. So you're sitting in a botanic garden, and as you see, there's lots of green leaves around, but of course those leaves fall eventually or die, and they don't just hang around, they decompose. And the reason they decompose is because fungi live on them, and fungi feed on them, and basically return the nutrients from the plants to the soil. So you've got the whole regeneration process, the whole decomposition process actually caused by fungal growth. And we just take it for granted. It's just happening. So in botanic gardens and even in the home garden, if you can leave fallen trees, branches, whatever, don't clean them up. Let the fungi do what comes naturally. Let the decomposition happen, and realize that when a when it rots, it only rots because fungi are there feeding on it and actually drawing their nutrients out of the wall. And so the wood actually collapses and we call it rot. The insects then with softer wood can go in and feed on that as well. So that's a community. Dead wood is incredibly alive. So it's like valuing some parts of plants that we might not have otherwise valued, the actual dead part. Fungi, though, also do amazing other things. In the soil, as you mentioned, Costa, this wood-wide web, the realization that actually plants kind of communicate with adjacent plants through this underground plumbing network of fungal hyphae. These are the tiny threads that are integrated with the roots of almost all plants, and they connect across to other plants. It's absolutely amazing, and it's happening unseen under the ground. So come autumn, we see these mushrooms that might produce above ground, and we think that's the fungus. But the fungus is down in the soil living, and it's living all year, and it just happens to need to reproduce like everything does. And so up pops a mushroom or something else, and we see it, but it's there all the time. So realizing that fungi are there even when we can't see them was important to me. And the reason they're there is, in fact, it's the whole explanation of how plants move from the seed to the land. And that happened a little while ago, about 450 million years ago. And so fungi, which were in the sea, and then they got onto the land. And that was fungi that they actually naturally associated. So it's that integration of fungi and plants has been there for millions and millions of years. Fungi do have an image problem, of course, in some people's minds, because there are some negative aspects. There are some disease-causing fungi, both of plants and of people and animals. But the fungal kingdom is so huge, it's larger even than the plants kingdom. And the numbers that we know are just a tiny fraction of the total diversity. So if you want to be able to name a new organism, new to science, study fungi. There's so many thousands more to be discovered.
So are you...
I'd also just add one more thing, because I think time is running, but we often talk about fauna and flora. There's a missing F word. The missing F word is funga. Oh. It's a relatively new term. We could say fungi, but funga has been approved by the aficionados elsewhere. So flora, fauna, and funga. And that's a better summary of biodiversity than just fauna and flora, because fungi actually integrate with flora and fauna intimately.
Wow, James, I reckon that is a drop mic moment for this panel discussion, because it is about the language we use. It is about the storytelling that you mentioned there, Peter, and to add that word means it changes the direction of how everyone following us will then look at the world around them.
Yeah, definitely. And with the fungi as well, it's having, you talked about sort of composting, it's going back to having that healthy arrangement. Like we talk about our gut a lot these days and having a good biome in your gut to keep you healthy and everything else. So that the soil's exactly the same. So you've got a healthy soil, you've got the friendly fungi, not the pathogenic ones, and then they fight off the pathogenic ones. So you've got healthier soils, and that means you've got healthier plants, and it's just endless.
Yeah. So Peter, are we going to see a name, Fungus Buchanis, at some point in the near future?
No, but I'll let you into a secret. We might see one that honours a certain rather popular politician in New Zealand, one Prime Minister, but I can't say any more. It's confidential. But you can't name things. No, you don't name things after yourself, but you...
This is restricted information. Don't unhear that, everyone. Unhear it.
Yeah, unhear it. Yeah, we'll see. Coming soon.
Exciting, exciting. You heard it first with Begans Live. All right, well, I like the way that we're playing with the aperture of things here. And Peter, from the fungi, where, you know, Ricardo, in your opening comments, you talked about plants and wildlife as organisations. As an organisation, they're working together. And now Gardens for Wildlife and Flora, or fauna, Gardens for Wildlife, it's kind of like the flora comes with that. And I think, again, there's this chance to play with the terms, because the terms place plants as subordinate to the real heroes of the show, the wildlife. You often hear people referring to a certain plant as a nectar provider for a particular bird, but this perception could actually be flipped. And this is what I like, because it's actually the plant with the power that's manipulating the wildlife for their benefit. You know what I mean? Like when you suddenly turn that, you know, by not heralding the plants and the heroes of the wildlife gardening movement, do you think there's a risk of perpetuating the insignificance of plants?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Can I? Have you got an easier one there, Costa, or can I phone a friend?
No, you're cornered. There's lots of people watching, and I'm not letting you out of this one.
That's the one. Well, actually, a little bit perhaps, but you know, thinking about what Peter was just saying, and the thing that comes to mind, the zombie fungi, that you know, these fungi that take control of animals and make them do things. You know, maybe, and you know, if I think about you know, really having driven the evolution on land, you know, by mining minerals and turning them into soil, and then plants taking advantage of that, and then of course the association between plants and fungi that Peter's described. So maybe it's the fungi that are driving the plants to drive the animals to their own benefit. No, look, I tend to, as a conservation and land manager, I have to look at things holistically. I can't just focus on one or the other. You know, everything is connected. I think all the other presenters have kind of touched on this already. There's all these connections that are going on that we're not quite always aware of. And that's the challenge, is to really understand the association. So for me to, you know, manage the patch of bushland at Cranbourne Gardens, it's not good enough for me to just focus on a particular animal or a particular plant or a particular fungi. I have to look at it in its totality. And I think, you know, when you look at some of the mutually beneficial partnerships that fungi and plants have forged, and I think, James, you're touching on the terrestrial orchids, and you know, these terrestrial orchids that we have here in Australia, absolutely reliant on fungi to basically germinate and get their nutrients. Without the fungi, there is no germination of these orchids. The orchids trick insects into what we call pseudo-copulation. You know, they basically mimic the female version of that insect and attract the insect to come closer. And when the insect comes in and collects some of the pollen and moves off to the other flower, it pollinates that next flower. So again, sort of that reproduction cycle continues for these terrestrial orchids. You take one of those components out, and the whole system is poorer for it. You know, fungi and animals forging partnerships, and we've touched upon you know, biomes in our digestive system. Fungi that live inside the stomach of cows, and you know, for the benefit of both the cow and the fungi. plants and animals forge these partnerships, and probably the simplest one we can think of are the pollination services that insects and other animals provide for plants. In the process, the plant provides nectar and pollen resources for these animals. So again, you can't take one or the other. They're just linked. So yes, this big web of life is what we need to focus on, and it's those interactions and those sort of interdependencies that really counts. And that goes from right through from our farming practices to me managing a natural resource like a remnant bushland, or to forestry, or the home gardener has to look at these things as well. So it's across all facets. I think as I've said, the real challenge is understanding the interdependencies. That they can be subtle, and unless we're studying these things really closely, we're going to miss them. So science has a lot, obviously, to offer in that regard, and we need to throw a heap more money into research so that we can understand these relationships better. We need to look at traditional Indigenous knowledge because they've been studying these things for thousands and thousands of years, and we need to learn from those. But yeah, if we want to conserve koalas and greater gliders, we need to be conserving the small number of eucalyptus species that they rely on. So to protect the koalas, you must protect the gum tree. If we want to conserve the orchids, we need to conserve those fungi and the insects that allow them to survive and reproduce. The list goes on. If we want to conserve glossy black cockatoos, one of the most looking at the trees they exclusively feed on, so protect tree oaks. If you want to protect butterflies, some specific association specific plants, you need to protect those plants. And then sometimes those relationships get a little bit trickier. So if we think of there's a butterfly in Victoria, the Alton copper butterfly. It relies, the caterpillar relies entirely on the plant species, sweet Passeria, a native indigenous tree to the area. But there's a very close association with the ants as well. So the ants protect the caterpillars and help them to go up to the leaves and feed on the Passeria leaf. So if we want to protect the butterfly, we need to protect the tree, and we need to protect the ants as well. There's just a whole, every time we look at any particular species, there will be that association. When you look at these, the Guns for Wildlife program, I think it not only acknowledges this, but the aim is to educate, the general public that these associations exist. And the plants, they may form the main structure or the backbone together with fungi, but they really are linked. And people join these programs for many different reasons. They're sort of at different stages of understanding. I started a Guns for Wildlife Victoria Facebook group a few months back, and it's really interesting to see sort of how people grow in their knowledge, and once they start sort of understanding a little bit more and researching a little bit more, it's amazing to see that transformation in people. Someone might be just totally attracted to getting more butterflies in their garden, and the thing that might come to mind at first is, well, I need to put lots of flowering plants out there because butterflies, like flowers, and that is true. But once you look a little bit deeper into it, most of the caterpillars of butterflies, again, have very close associations with very specific plants. So a lot of the butterflies we get down here in Melbourne rely on native grasses for part of their life cycle. So all of a sudden, native grasses become very important to this gardener. That's what they'll be putting in their garden. So yeah, look, I think the whole premise of these programs is to provide sort of stepping stones and links between different habitat areas. So, and that's for plants and animals and fungi. The flora, the fauna, and the fungi. Did I get that right, Peter?
Yep.
There it is, Pete.
So these are just corridors. These are just corridors, so these interactions can persist. That's what they're there for. So yeah, look, I think the aim is not to champion one over the other, but to really demonstrate that one can't live without the other.
And thanks, Ricardo, because that ties in to this next question that I want to ask James, because all of those links that you're talking about, you take one element out and that affects right up the chain and down the chain. So with that in mind, like Ricardo's talking about the learning that can happen in a backyard garden or a community garden, or like the Garden for Wildlife program and what it does. Now, as a Botanic Gardens, you're not only doing research, but you're sharing that research with people. And in the meantime, the ecosystem is still evolving. And with climate change, do you see the gardens here in Wollongong heading in a direction that differs from where it's been and where it's come to in the last 50 years?
Yeah, I think it'll be a continuing sort of natural progression and through time. So the gardens opened in 1971 here in Darrell Land as a donation from the Hoskins family to open a botanic garden. The botanic garden then developed, and the first collections we had here were more sort of heritage based, so think rose gardens, like azalea banks, but very quickly followed in its time the planting of our rainforest and wet and dry sclerophyll forests. And I think these collections as locally indigenous plants to the area. We also represent a bit of the East Coast, but with mainly a sort of local focus. I think our collections have developed quite a lot in targeting education around the local plants that are around us. And so I don't think that side will change. I think we'll always have that heritage element and the local regional element. But I think what can happen is with our rainforest collections and local species, we can use those species in a place like a garden where it's a bit more controlled, where you can study those plants to see how they do adapt to climate change. Do they make it? Do they start to suffer? What starts to happen? Do the fungi start winning the battle and taking over? Or, is there something we can do in balance? And you've got plants growing in a cultivated setup right next to them growing in the wild. And so we might mulch garden beds and we might have irrigation open to us if it's particularly dry. So does that push the balance back in the other way? And so it's a good sort of classroom, if you like, a good scientist laboratory to study in with a bit more controlled parameters right next to the wild environment. And as we progress as well, there's a really interesting group that's formed the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens, and they're coming up with a new tool, and it's called the Climate Risk Assessment Tool. So we'll be able to look 50 years into the future at what species might actually grow within the sort of temperature ranges and rainfall ranges of Wollongong Botanic Garden, and we'll be able to sort of plan our collections around that. Now, we won't stop planting our local natives here, but it might guide it when we sort of got more exotic species or species from not around here. We might see that in 50 years' time that plant just will not grow here. But you might still plant it because you might want to test that theory. It's all, going to be a sort of testing time, so a really interesting time for science. And I think we're involved here in conservation projects like we've mentioned already throughout. And I think they will take on a climate change, would inevitably come into the projects that come into the gardens and that we work on. We work in sort of partnership with other botanic gardens, government agencies, Indigenous partnerships, volunteers, on conservation programs, and we've been working on sort of several threatened species. And I think that work will continue to expand as the Botanic Gardens grows and as we go through and witness more of climate change as it comes along. And then, you know, Wollongong Botanic Gardens, we're part of Wollongong City Council, and so there's the remits and the responses to climate change within the sort of broader council. So there's programs like the Urban Greening Strategy, which is looking to increase tree cover in Wollongong, and as a response to help mitigate climate change. And so we're actually working through council and with local experts at what of our native species around us might be appropriate to use for urban street trees. So we're trialling plants from our local habitat that might not be available through commercial nurseries, and we're planting them into the gardens in more exposed areas, and we're growing them on so that they can be planted into our streetscape. So you start to bring the Botanic Gardens into the whole council.
Out goes the story.
Out goes the story, and out go the tree roots, and then out spread the fungi, and in come the insects and the birds, and it's just that fascinating world we're in, and sort of constantly evolving. And I think underpinning that Botanic Gardens role that we've talked about before, and you've mentioned, is sort of in education. And so I think that will continue to grow, because, I mean, look at today, all these hundreds of people have come into the Botanic Gardens. It's a perfect time to share the power of plants, what they can do for you. And, you know, Botanic Gardens, as we can see from across Australia and New Zealand, are all getting very excited today about the power of plants, and that's why we're here. So I think that education focus and our ability to share the knowledge across the board for the flora, funga and faunal worlds, all coming together as one. So yeah, it poses a great future for us.
Look, I think that's the perfect thread into you, Suzanne, because when I look, and James, you can see it, when I look at the screen here and I see Georgina, storyteller.
Yeah.
Storytelling the whole time. Ricardo, you're telling stories, and whether it's the Gardens for Wildlife program, but the broader story that you're telling at the gardens in Cranbourne. Peter, the story that you're telling, not just around fungi, but around plants and trees and what's going on down here, you know, like this world that we, you know, is more important than we've been given credit. And, you know, Suzanne, it leads me to your story, which is all around the story of Australian ingredients, Australian plant ingredients, and it is massive. But there is so much important story that predicates the telling of the story. It needs to be based in a foundation of First Nations, not just the knowledge, but the ownership and the dissemination of that story by First Nations people. It's a language with so much potential. And tell us how that is germinating and where that fits in for you when it comes to not just the production of these ingredients, but the growing of the stories to bring all of our speakers and the big picture that Ricardo was talking about together as one. Oh, Suzanne, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm on now. I have my mic on.
Oh,
Sorry,
look.
that was such a good segue into. I missed it.
That's all right. That's all right. Well, I'll stumble backwards
I'll come
again,
in again.
and then you can carry on.
Right. I was going to say, pardon the pun, but I think the opportunity with Australian native botanicals absolutely it's the low-hanging fruit that will I believe that will reconcile us collectively together as a country. because of that shared knowledge. And I think we're at a really beautiful point now in our history to celebrate such a thing. I think, and because ANFAB, Australian Native Foods and Botanical, have been going for a couple of decades. One of the things that I'm really proud of is being the chair of the Australian Native Foods and Botanicals and having the opportunity to guide and facilitate this shared experience, because I always say we're better together. If Burke and Wills would have listened to my mob, perhaps they would have been around longer to tell their story, because I was hearing about the scientific, opportunities and things, and I often think about the amazement of our ancient elders and their, for many millennia, for them to have, there's one particular seed that, the process to get to that was such a lengthy period of time for them to make some bread for themselves. So that seed pod perhaps was pound, roasted, then it would be pound and roasted again, then it would be pound and put into a cloth or a skin and laid in running water for at least 3 weeks until it fermented, and then pound and roasted and made into that cake. So to think about that mindset that actually created that, that whole process. So I think yes, we are on the verge of a very exciting new industry for Australia. We know we can create something that's very uniquely a brand Australia, that's very unique to us in this ancient continent. And I think also through the sharing of our traditional practices to be able to restore country again. And so I know where I live in central Queensland, and I have a 22,500 acre garden. We had the opportunity to acquire this property back, but had been cleared through overgrazing. We have 7 springs here, so to have the opportunity to lead within our space for landholders on good traditional land management practices, to see the response that the country has had in the 2 years we've been here, opportunity to reintroduce ceremony because of how we balanced our society. And, we were rainmakers, or, having an understanding of our seasons and thinking, when it was the right time to go hunting was because it was the second blossom of the wattle, after that first storm at a certain period of time. And all of that stuff really told us our whole environment. That was that scientific mind. And I think that's what I find really interesting. I think too, though, one of the challenges that we find is that we start to move into the IP sharing. So the intellectual property sharing of our First Peoples, or almost every Indigenous person around the planet. And I think that back in, if I think about in the Western mind, when there were, wizards, or there were healers that had these great remedies, whether it was the stinging nettle or whatever it was, I think that's that one thing that we share. But when it comes to Indigenous knowledge sharing, it's about the benefit that perhaps comes back to Indigenous communities and people, so that then we can find ways to, I suppose, lead in our true sense of self-determination on how we can create income streams for ourselves, but we can truly partner locally. And one of those things I know is with the ethnobotany work, so having an opportunity to have Indigenous ethnobotanists, and how we're gathering our knowledge, we're reconnecting to our songlines. I mean, our culture in itself, for Aboriginal people, it's a very complex culture, but it can also be very simple, because for us it's about being one with your space. And if you're one with your space and you observe everything within that space, and that's what I suppose informed our law that governed the way we respected not only each other but our whole environment, even to the soils. And it was exciting to hear about the fungi, and knowing that certain uses of fungi was good for teething for us, So to have the knowledge around that, to know that, it's not going to take you on some psychedelic trip, but as a baby, but it was actually, so even to have the knowledge for that this is good for a baby to teething. Witchetty grubs was another thing. I remembered, hearing stories, and we would with witchetty grubs, and the teething of, for us, sucking a witchetty grub, had some sort of a benefit, for us. I think too, one of the things that I'm very excited with out here that we're having the opportunity and seeing also, around Australia is the reintroduction of fire stick burning. So I heard about insects, and I heard about all of the soils, everything we talk about, and we've got this whole space of carbon that people are talking about. That's this big movement that's happening. And when we're very mindful about how we understood the right time to burn country. So we just had a burning out here at the end of March. Now, we had 30 mil of rain the night before we lit the fire that next day. Now, one would assume that fire wouldn't have happened, but to actually witness the fire slowly and calmly just move its way through country, and it was such a cool fire that it just went through. It's seen the native grasses and it's seen trees, and it was almost like it slowed down and went, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go around you because you're not ready to burn yet. And to witness that and to watch that whole mosaic happening, but to know that you could walk on country straight away, that your soil was so rich and vibrant that you knew everything was going to grow. But you also got to witness all the little spiders and all the little insects and all the little critters all exit without being fried. You also understood that the grandparent trees with their big overarching canopies, they weren't getting fried, so that they could stay there and still be that grandparent plant with the shade over, looking after all the little young'uns underneath and everything that, I suppose, made all of that space. So I think, for me, when I think about the Australian native foods, I think there's a couple of things there, Costa. I think one of the things in particular is the culinary delight, the opportunities that we actually do have, and the flavours. A lot of people, if we think about, because we also think about both our flora and our fauna. And, if I think about our native cherry, and it's such a tiny, tiny, tiny little fruit, but it just gives you the biggest bang of flavour that when it hits your mouth, The finger lime is just such an amazing, fruit. You wouldn't think that this tiny little bead would give you such a zing. Or when we even think about our green ants, and what green ant can provide for you. So absolutely, I think everything that we have out in front of us to something that weed, and that weed that grows at a certain time of the year, and we pull that weed out of the ground after we get some wet, and then there's a beautiful little tubular there that we can eat that is not only nutritious, but it's also healthy for us as well. So I think we're in a good position, and I think we're ANFAB. We just had a national think tank last Monday in Brisbane, and we're very excited, with the think tank in the direction on a national scale, where we can take this opportunity for our country, and I think landholders in particular, giving them an opportunity to think about our native rices or our native grains, especially with our grasses and stuff, that we see the millets and the Mitchell grass country and all of those things that can provide such abundance for us, that we don't necessarily have to waste our resources, that we can actually put all of our beautiful water, all of our energy into things that we know are going to sustain the land for many generations to come. And I think just in summing up, there's a story I like to say and share with people around at the beginning of time, when our elders all created that circle to create their first law. They created a circle in the middle, and in the middle, that was the fire, that was the children's fire. So every time we sat down to tell story or to talk about business, we always had our eye on the children's fire. So I'm happy Botanical Gardens Day, everybody. I think it's power of the plant is in many different levels and layers, absolutely. So, and thank you for allowing me to share.
Oh, wow, I need to stand up. Wow, Suzanne, thank you for sharing a little snippet of time with us. I could keep this panel open and start to play tennis or table tennis with each of you for hours, and I'm sure a lot of the people watching at home who are comfortable and connected to this conversation would love to too. But of course we do need to wrap it up. But just in closing, I think from the point of view of this discussion, sitting here and looking at the screen and looking how it's unfolded, we started with Georgina and her capacity to be out there telling stories and connecting with a broad audience of people. And I think the thing that resonated clearly for me, Georgina, was the small acts together. Every little blog, every little magazine article, every story that's shared online is an act that can be like the fungal hyphae, be that mycorrhizal connector under the ground, above the ground, on the Wood Wide Web down here or the World Wide Web up there. And it threaded so beautifully into the work that you're doing, Peter. And anyone in plants knows that there is so much unknown about fungi. And it's really the future of research is that we have a planet under our feet that we barely understand. And it's so exciting when you read the work of someone like Merlin Sheldrake, who's just putting it out there. There's so many mycologists. Oh, there it is, This Entangled Life. Yeah, that's it. That is a book that will put into context some of the story that Peter threaded, then into your work, Ricardo, and just that one part of your work, the Gardens for Wildlife. Everyone's living in a garden. And I mean, Suzanne, your garden, just 22,500.
I know, when you threw that in, Suzanne, that was pretty impressive.
Kind of like, but it goes back to what Georgina said about that little carport. And that carport is as valuable as those 22,500 acres because it's bringing locals in and sharing that story. And then, of course, how appropriate that we bookended with you, Suzanne, in this week, in Reconciliation Week, for you to bring in not just the role of bush ingredients, but the platform and I suppose there's a public license, and that license is the First Nations license. And when you talk with the knowledge of that license and the knowledge that information comes from a university of experience and a culture that we're now recognising in these new ways, and your work can bring people in that may not have first connected through Gardens for Wildlife or through composting with, me jumping around telling about it, or they mightn't have connected through the Botanic Gardens, but they connected through food and botanicals. So I think big congratulations to all of our panel for being able to paint this picture today, and to everyone at Begans for putting this panel together. If you want to watch this again, or better still, jump on and share this throughout your social networks so that more people can see this and have the switch turn on and see their light bulb moment. And it could be a fluoro one. It could be a big spotlight like Georgina's that never turns off. And that's even better, because if we don't know the off switch of the power of plants, then you will be the role models for all of the children that I see here today, and all of the children in your life. And James, of course, your role in that public face of Botanic Gardens, straddling a future with a changing climate, but still being able to tell that story without the polarity, without the polarised political camps of like, as soon as I mention that word, I'm over here and you're over there and we never meet. And I think our panel has beautifully articulated the inclusiveness that Suzanne mentioned. And I really appreciated what you said there, Suzanne, about being one with your space. We can be at one with our space by going out into other spaces to learn more about what thrives and drives the spaces that we engage with. So at this point, if you're out there at home, you've got all afternoon to drop into your local Botanic Gardens. Anyone in the Illawarra that's watching this, there's events still going on here at the Botanic Gardens through till 4 o'clock. Come in, there's people everywhere. Come and say hi. I'll be flapping around. James is here, Clarence is here. It's going to be a great afternoon. And to finish, I've got a great privilege of welcoming over here on my right, Dakota Fyra. Is that correct? Yes. And he's going to finish this wonderful broadcast with a poem entitled The Mosaic of Secrets. Please welcome Dakota, everyone.
Stop. Who are you? You are not alone, far from home, yet safe. Many hands turned such soils before time was stamped with dates. Your steps fall on footprints that sink as deep as sacred grounds breathe. They recede from a taxing chronology. The many hands bear a timeless lease on a mosaic of intent. There is no date that will draw an end to this place. As long as the planet survives, so will we. Beware mosquito custodians who ask again, what brought you here? Your silent answer lands on water dragon surveillance. The guards have passed to the past when Melaleuca and paperbark shaped creek banks. Their roots still stand the test of remnants of responsibility or succession of inhabitants. Human lives are often stranger than flies, strangling in web nestled in window of strangler fig. All while this stranger nests in a garden born of a world that strangles trees and creeks. Red cedars never seeded, hence their cries. Sunlight dances with the wind here, 8 legs sunbathe on glass hammocks. Winding paths intertwine like water vines, our winding lives on glass hammocks. Follow Mother Mountain's web, she watches every step. See there, bush turkey scratching, with beak like Coolaman and feet like spear, sweeping a floor of leaf and blue quandong. Gust of wind clears country's throat. Filtering creeks are ancient stones, mirroring history. Reach deeper. Watch clear waters filter existential trauma. When the rain hits, families sing. Husband and wife huddle tight beneath canopy, and a lonely lyrebird sings in melancholy a multilingual lullaby. In the middle of it all, Mum Kira's tears flow and teach, from sclerophyll escarpment toward an annexed beach. Everything here has purpose, has story, has name, more than a square label or QR code could explain. And in the middle of it all, a garden of life's secrets is where you'll find me.